Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 431 for June 2nd, 2025. And hey, I'm back. And hopefully you didn't notice me being gone because I pre-recorded everything and scheduled it before I left. I just got back from a fantastic trip to Alaska. I've been around quite a bit. I've been to dozens of countries and honestly, maybe even fewer U.S. states by comparison. But I've never been to Alaska, and it's been on my list for a long time. And we did it up right. I went to Denali for a few days and then did a cruise for about a week. It was just amazing. The scenery was fabulous. If you've never done it, if it's a bucket list thing, you should absolutely do it. It was just wonderful. And a lot of great memories, but the scenery in particular was just fabulous. So I learned some things about this because we went up to Anchorage and then came back through Vancouver, which means that was an international flight, which means I had to go through U.S. Customs. And if you may recall, I went through a tip of the week a while back where I had done a lot of research on this, trying to decide what devices to bring and what my OPSEC was going to be for the trip in terms of protecting those devices, what I was going to do if customs, border protection people or security people or whatever asked me to turn over and unlock my phone. What was I going to do? I sweated a lot of details and went through a lot of heartache over that. The spoiler is that everything was just fine. But I learned some things that I want to pass along as well. So that's going to be part of my tip of the week. I got lots of great feedback about my interview with Josh Corman and his Undisruptable 27 project. Again, if you missed that, you should definitely go back and listen to that episode. It was just a few weeks ago. I'm trying to actually socialize that particular podcast as best as I can because it's really super important. And I mean, we talk about a lot of things on this show that I think are important and things that we need to be working on and things we need to fix. But I mean, this one is, can be life or death. It's kind of hard to get more serious than that. So anyway, if you have the opportunity, if you have some way to spread that one around, I would appreciate if you would help me reach as many people with that particular episode as possible. And I've already been talking with Josh. I'm going to be doing more interviews throughout the rest of this year, certainly, around this topic and around, critical infrastructure and preparing and being resilient. I'm going to be doing some more of that throughout this year because, again, I think it's crucially important and I want to make sure that it kind of stays top of mind. I don't want to ignore all the other privacy and security stuff we normally talk about. That's all important too. But I definitely want to, keep coming back and making sure that we're doing what we can and paying attention to this and not forgetting about it. I also ran into a very interesting and very long article in The Atlantic about Michael Bazzell, who runs the Intel Techniques website and wrote the book on extreme privacy, literally. And I'm not going to go through it here. It's way, way, way too long for that. But I will put a link in the show notes because if that interests you at all, it's about not just Michael Bazzell, but what it takes to disappear today, quote unquote, disappear. And it's just very interesting. And it just goes to show that unless you're willing to commit time, effort, resources, and money, it's almost impossible to do today. So I'm not going to do that as an article. Maybe I'd love to interview Michael someday, but until then, you might want to check out this article. I will put it in the show notes. All right, so we have a news show for you today, and I've got a lot of things to talk about. I can almost guarantee we're going to run long today, and I will apologize in advance. And it's not just because there's stuff I missed while I was gone that I want to cover. There's actually not a lot of that. There's just some more than the usual number of things that I definitely want to talk about. And as always, it's a triage process. I've got way many more news stories that I could possibly cover in a news show. So I have to pick and choose. And today, it was hard to narrow it down beyond what I have today. And so we've got a lot to cover. First of all, if you have an Asus router, ASUS, they're very popular. They're actually good routers. But there is a campaign right now to take them over in a way that is really hard to fix if they have been compromised. So I will tell you how to tell if your Asus router has been compromised and how to make sure that it doesn't get compromised if it hasn't been. I told you I would follow up with the 23andMe bankruptcy and sale of data. That has happened. We know who bought the data and we know how much they paid for it. And then we're going to talk about something that's really hard to describe. And so again, you're going to want to follow the link on this, but Google's I/O conference, which is their annual developer conference, they debuted a new AI video generator that is scarily good. You're going to really want to go check out some of these videos, so you're going to want to follow the links, but I'll try to describe them to you, and we'll talk about it today here in the news. And then we're going to talk about how the current U.S. administration and a lot of the agencies with their politically appointed heads and Elon Musk and Doge and a lot of the people kind of in charge in the U.S. right now are really keen on not only collecting a lot of your data, but now they're also wanting to share data amongst agencies to create this massive database of your data, which is just begging to be abused or hacked. So I've got a couple stories around that topic. And then Consumer Reports is telling us that the Kroger loyalty program, that's a grocery store here in the United States, a big grocery store chain, is collecting your data. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised about that. However, they are monetizing that data in other ways that might shock you. And then I've got a couple back-to-back articles that are related from 404 Media about automated license plate readers and how Flock, the company that is collecting all this data, is trying to collect even more data and create even more tools for law enforcement. But they've already got tools right now that allows law enforcement in one state to search for people all over the United States. So I've got a couple articles about that we'll talk about today. And then we do have a few good news stories. Android is now getting the automatic reboot after being unused for a few days feature that Apple quietly rolled out, I think it was last year. That's a good thing. Signal has responded to Microsoft's recall feature that takes pictures of your screen every few seconds, saves them, and then runs AI through them to help you remember stuff. But it also means, of course, that they're taking pictures of all your messages, including Signal messages, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of end-to-end encryption. An EU court has ruled that tracking-based online ads are illegal, and Montana becomes the first state to close the law enforcement data broker Loophole. And then, like I said, we will get to my tip of the week about my experiences going through U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. We're going to start off with one of, I think, two articles that I've gotten from Lifehacker today. And this one is about Asus routers. If you have one, you might want to listen up. Spoiler alert, this is currently only affecting about 9,000 of these worldwide, so that's not many, but I will tell you why you might not want to take comfort in that and still take action here. So let me read this article from Lifehacker. Asus's routers are popular and well-reviewed. As such, there's a good chance you have one of its devices powering your home Wi-Fi. If you do, you should probably check on it since thousands of Asus routers are now compromised. Cybersecurity company Grey Noise published a blog post about this router attack on last Wednesday. Grey Noise says attackers used brute force login attempts, in other words, running millions of login attempts until the right match is found, and authentication bypasses, forcing your way in around traditional authentication protocols, to break into these routers. Notably, hackers used authentication bypass techniques that aren't assigned CVEs, or the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures numbers. CVEs are labels used to track publicly disclosed security vulnerabilities, which means the security vulnerabilities were either unknown or known only to a limited circle. Once in, hackers exploited the Asus router's CVE 2023 blah, blah, blah. It's a number you won't remember. But anyway, once they managed to hack into the router, they used this further vulnerability to run whatever commands they wanted. Hackers enabled SSH, or Secure Shell, which is a secure remote login function. They enabled SSH access through the Asus settings, which let them connect to and control the devices. They then stored the configuration, or this backdoor technique, into NVRAM, or non-volatile RAM, rather than the disk of the router, which most routers don't really have disk, it's more RAM. But anyway, the point is they stored it in permanent memory, not memory that gets erased when you reboot the router. That's a common way to fix some of these kind of bugs, is just to reboot your router. Anyway, the hackers did not leave malware behind and even disabled logging, which makes their attacks difficult to detect. It's not clear who's behind these attacks, but Grey Noise did say the following, quote, "The tactics used in this campaign, stealthy initial access, use of built-in system features for persistence, and careful avoidance of detection, are consistent with those seen in advanced long-term operations, including activity associated with advanced persistent threat actors, or APT actors, and operational relay box, or ORB, networks. While Gray Noise has made no attribution, the level of tradecraft suggests a well-resourced and highly capable adversary, unquote. SIFT, which is Gray Noise's AI technology, first detected an issue on March 17th, noticing unusual traffic. Gray Noise uses fully emulated Asus profiles running factory firmware to test for issues like these, which let researchers observe the attacker's full behavior, reproduce the attack, and discover how the backdoor was installed. Researchers at the company received SIFT's report the following day and began researching, coordinating with government and industry partners. Gray Noise reported that, as of May 27th, nearly 9,000 routers were confirmed compromised. The company is pulling that data from Census, that's CENSYS, which keeps tabs on internet-facing devices throughout the world. To make matters worse, the affected devices only continue to increase. As of this piece, there were 9,022 impacted routers listed on Census's site. And for the hell of it, since they had a link, I went and checked myself, and as of Saturday, at least Saturday afternoon, that number was now 9,122. Luckily, Gray Noise reports that Asus patched the security vulnerability in a recent firmware update. However, if the router was compromised before the patch was installed, the backdoor the hackers put into the router will not be removed. Even if this is the case, you can take action to protect your router. First, confirm your router is actually made by Asus. That's ASUS. If it is, log into your router via your internet browser. Logging into your router varies by device, but according to Asus, you can head to www.asusrouter.com or enter your router's IP address into your address bar, then log in with your Asus router name and password. Asus says if this is the first time you've logged into the router, you'll need to set up your account. And so this is, by the way, just real quick, this is your admin interface on your router, which I've talked about before. In the old days, most of these passwords, these admin passwords, were fixed and well known. You could just look them up on the internet. If you knew what your router was, you could look up your admin password. Now, by law in some cases, but also just because it's better security, a lot of routers come with a randomly generated password for the admin account, which is often printed on the bottom of your device or on the back of your device. All right, anyway, moving on. From here, identify the Enable SSH settings option, and the article says SSD, but they meant SSH. Look for Enable SSH, which is a settings option. And you can find this under Service or Administration according to PC Mag, which is a link to another article that tells you how to look for this. You'll know the router is compromised if you see that someone can log in via SSH over port 53828 with the following key, and it gives an SSH key, which I'm not going to bother trying to read. But basically, this is assuming you know how to log into your admin router and find where it has stored these SSH keys, which would allow somebody else to log into the device remotely. So then it says that you should disable SSH entry and block these 4 IP addresses. And I'm not going to read them. They're in the article. And frankly, these IP addresses could change. So anyway, if you think you might have been compromised, you're going to want to read this whole article that I'm talking about here anyway. But I'm just kind of giving you an idea what it says. From here, factory reset your router. Unfortunately, the patch alone won't be enough since the attack survives any update, and I'll come back to that in a minute. A total reset is the only way to be sure your router is protected. However, if you see your router was not affected here, install the latest firmware update ASAP. Unaffected routers that install the latest patch will be protected from this type of attack going forward. So again, if you have an Asus router, please just go to the show notes, click on this link, and you might even want to click through to the PC Mag link, which is a little more direct about how to figure this out and check your router. But let me explain that one part about resetting your router. So again, what's more common these days with IoT or router malware infestations is that they only exist in the device's RAM, which is memory that is flushed and wiped every time you restart the device. Meaning that if it is infected, oftentimes just simply turning it off and turning back on will often cleanse your device of the malware. This is not one of those cases. This is actually a case where they have figured out a way to keep your device compromised after you reboot the router. They have figured out a way to maintain access across reboots. And I think from what this is saying, I think basically what they're doing is they have logged into the admin panel on your router and installed an SSH key that allows them to remotely log into your device. And that SSH key is not purged by turning the router off and on. So they are suggesting that you factory reset the router, which brings back whatever software was initially installed on the router and returns it to the state it was in when you first took it out of the box, which probably means it would have really old software on it, which means that really old software is probably vulnerable. And the first thing you need to do after you do that is update the software. But if you factory reset your router, your Wi-Fi password and any configuration you have done to that device, like set it to your, set the SSID to my cool Wi-Fi network or whatever, and set the password to something that you can remember and your family members know, and all your IoT devices have built into them now, that'll all stop working because if you factory reset the router, all that configuration is gone. So make sure that you know everything that you have customized. In particular, make sure that you know what your Wi-Fi SSID is and your Wi-Fi password is, because you're probably going to want to set those right back to where they were so that all your devices that were connected can now reconnect. Otherwise, you're going to have to go to every single one of your IoT devices and reconfigure them with whatever your new password is. And again, that's your Wi-Fi password. That's different from the administrator password that you use to actually log into the router itself in order to configure it. So let me say just a couple other quick things about this. First of all, 9,000 routers is really not that many, globally speaking. But it's possible that that's because the threat actor involved here is only targeting routers that it is specifically interested in. Which if I were North Korea or China or whatever, and I was trying to hack into something and be stealthy, which these guys are obviously trying to do, you could tell by their techniques here, you wouldn't want to do any more than absolutely necessary because it would risk you getting found out. And in fact, that's how they got found out here. Somehow they stumbled upon one of these images at this software company, which were probably like canary devices. They were put on the internet and designed to get hacked so that they could, see them getting hacked and reverse engineer how they got hacked, which is exactly what happened here. So anyway, they may have been trying to fly under the radar, and by doing that, they may have been, limiting how many devices they were trying to attack. But especially now that this has been publicized, if some other group with a different MO, with a different purpose, figures out what this other hacking group figured out and figures out how to copy this technique, then it could run rampant, right? They may do this for other reasons entirely. So the numbers could still swell significantly in the future. So don't let the fact that it's only hit 9,000 routers make you feel super safe. If you have one of these Asus routers, you definitely need to make sure you get the software patch installed right away. So the other thing I want to say is that remediating this is way, way, way too complicated for most people. I mean, even as I was reading this to you, it's like, who is really going to be able to do this? You really need some tech savvy to be able to do this. And we just can't keep putting the onus on the user here. We've got to make these devices much more secure by default. Now, we don't know yet how they got in there. It may have been a super clever hack. But also, honestly, I think we're probably at the point where these routers need to be more self-healing somehow. But I will just leave you with this. Your home router is probably the most important piece of hardware on your network. It is the gateway to your home network and all the other devices that are on your network. So you definitely need to make sure that you've got that router as protected as you can make it. So make sure that you've got a really strong administrator password for configuring that router. Make sure you keep the software updated. If there's an automatic update option, you should definitely enable that. My router even has a thing that lets me automatically reboot it once a week, which is just kind of good maintenance. And as your hardware gets old, you really need to be replacing it. I'm just going to pull a number out here. I'm going to say maybe every 5 years or so. That's give or take depending on how good your router is and how good they are at keeping the software up to date. But certainly if your device has been end of lifed and is no longer receiving updates, then you should be looking to get yourself a new router. All right, we need to keep moving. Next up, this is an article from 404 Media, and it was longer than this, but I really cut it back just to kind of get to the key parts of this, mostly because I told you I was going to keep you up to date on this. And it's about the 23andMe sale of the company as it went through bankruptcy and all the DNA and genetic data that it has. The title of the article is 23andMe shows your genetic data is worth $17. I actually disagree with that assessment, but I'll come back to that. So real quick, my snippet of this says, Monday, and this was 2 weeks ago, the genetic pharmaceutical company Regeneron announced that it is buying genetic sequencing company 23andMe out of bankruptcy for $256 million. The purchase gives us a rough estimate for the current monetary value of a single person's genetic data, $17. And we'll come back to that in a minute and where they get that number. Regeneron is a drug company that, quote, intends to acquire 23andMe's Personal Genome Service, or PGS, Total Health and Research Services business lines, together with its biobank and associated assets, for $256 million, and for 23andMe to continue all consumer genome services uninterrupted, unquote. The company said in a press release. Regeneron is working on personalized medicine and new drug discovery, and the company itself has, quote, sequenced the genetic information of nearly 3 million people in research studies, unquote. This means that Regeneron itself has the ability to perform DNA sequencing and suggests that the critical thing that it is acquiring is 23andMe's vast trove of genetic data. The most recently available numbers show that 23andMe collected DNA from roughly 15 million people, meaning that 23andMe's genetic data is worth roughly $17 per person. So basically, they took the $256 million price tag and divided by 15 million people, and that's where they got $17. The sale to Regeneron means that the genetic data collected by 23andMe will likely be used for the development of new drugs, which felt like the most likely and perhaps the best case scenario for the company's bankruptcy. In the past, genetic data companies have been sold to larger companies that explicitly make DNA forensics products for law enforcement. Regeneron said in the press release that it, quote, intends to ensure compliance with 23andMe's consumer privacy policies and applicable laws with respect to the treatment of customer data. As the successful bidder, Regeneron is prepared to detail the intended use of customer data and the privacy programs and security controls in place for review by a court-appointed independent customer privacy ombudsman and other interested parties, unquote. Okay, so I told you I would keep you up on this, and this is exactly what we thought was going to happen. Someone was going to buy them out, and they were buying them out for your DNA, at least if you or somebody you know had sent spit samples to 23andMe to check your ancestry. Right? This is really valuable data in the right hands. Now, this whole estimated value of $17, I think, is not terribly meaningful. I mean, first of all, this is a fire sale, right? This is a bankruptcy. So it's not like the business was doing great and they were selling it to the best bidder. This was a matter of satisfying, whoever the people, the creditors of 23andMe were. And it probably doesn't really reflect the true value of that DNA data. On top of that, they were assuming that the Regeneron got the data from all 15 million of those people. And as you know, I've been preaching for months now that you should be deleting your data, and so is basically every other media outlet out there. So who knows how many people's DNA were actually left, at the time of the sale was completed. But I'm certainly hoping it was a whole lot less than 15 million people. And then also, if you or somebody you know has their data at 23andMe and did not ask them to delete it, I would not rely on them complying with quote unquote consumer privacy policies and applicable laws to protect your data here. Oftentimes those laws are really lax and are filled with loopholes, and same for the privacy policies. So if you have not deleted it yet, you could probably still try. You may have to wait till this whole bankruptcy thing clears, but I would certainly not waste any time. And if you haven't already, put in your request to have that data deleted right away. And keep records of that request because you might need it for legal reasons later. Next up, this is from Lifehacker, and this is about a brand new AI video generating tool from Google that is just astonishing. I'm going to read their take on this, then I'll give you my quick take. But honestly, you really, really, really need to see the videos for yourself because they're just mind-blowing. All right, so here's the article. I don't mean to be alarmist, but I do think it's time to start assuming everything you see online is fake. The internet is full of content produced by real people, of course, this article included, but AI-generated media is getting so realistic that it almost puts you at a disadvantage to presume the content you're scrolling past on your feeds is legitimate. Don't skip this article because you know what AI content looks like. The current stuff your algorithm delivers to your social media feeds is easy to spot if you know what to looking for. But even if you can identify AI slop the second it hits your eyeballs, you need to know you're not ready for the next wave of AI-generated videos. This wave isn't just on its way, it's already here. So far, most of the AI videos taking over social media feeds rely mainly on their visuals and background sounds to sell their alleged authenticity. You'll notice none of the characters in any of these videos actually speak. If they do, it's immediately off-putting, with out-of-sync lip movements and typically robotic voices. Something happened this week that only made me more pessimistic about the future of truth on the internet. During this week's Google I/O event, Google unveiled Veo 3, that's VEO 3, its latest AI video model. Like other competitive models out there, Veo 3 can generate highly realistic sequences, which Google showed off throughout the presentation. Sure, not great, but also nothing really new here. But Veo 3 isn't just capable of generating video that might trick your eye into thinking it's real. Veo 3 can also generate audio to go alongside the video. That includes sound effects, but also dialogue, lip-synced dialogue. And they talk about a few different clips which go with videos that I can't show you, so I'm going to skip some of that. But I'm going to skip to this last one that is a completely and utterly fake video about a reporter doing interviews at what appears to be a car show. And so the article says, but this clip is, without a doubt, the one that should sound the alarm for each and every one of us. Someone generated a fake video of a fake car show featuring fake interviews with fake attendees. It's far from perfect, but any AI quirks are totally overshadowed by the surface-level realism here. Not only would the AI's Got Talent fans buy this, I would buy this, especially if I wasn't looking out for it. And here, that was a reference to America's Got Talent. I guess they do some AI videos. Anyway, it's the visuals, it's the dialogue, it's the crowds, it's the lighting, it's the candid laughter at quote-unquote mistakes, it's the sound of the mic being bumped into. Congratulations on noticing the dialogue often doesn't make sense or that the people in the background defy laws of physics, but you won't notice it when it hits mid-scroll on TikTok or Instagram. None of this tech is perfect. I'm not here to tell you that everything Veo spits out is indistinguishable from real content, or that the videos are absent any of the usual AI tells. What I'm saying is, it's time to turn on your BS detectors and keep them active full time. When engaging with videos on the internet, especially short-form algorithmic clips, you might be safer operating under the assumption the content is fake from the jump, and require proof beyond a reasonable doubt that what you're seeing wasn't generated with a simple prompt and a $250 budget. That feels extreme, but after what I've seen this week, I really don't see another way to engage with this content going forward. We're in scary territory now. Today it's demos of musicians and streamers. Tomorrow it's a politician saying something they didn't. A suspect committing the crime they're accused of. A reporter feeding you lies through the news. And those reporter and news were in quotes. I hope this is as good as technology gets. I hope AI companies run out of training data to improve their models and the governments take some action to regulate this technology. But seeing as the Republicans in the United States passed a bill that included a ban on the state-enforced AI regulations for 10 years, I'm pretty pessimistic on the latter point. In all likelihood, this tech is going to get better, with zero guardrails to ensure it advances safely. I'm left wondering how many of those politicians who voted yes on that bill watched an AI-generated video on their phone this week and thought nothing of it. Okay, so I could go on a long AI rant here. Honestly, we need to do a whole show again on this because it's really gotten out of hand, and there's a lot of stuff being said that I think is being hyped and oversold, both for the good and for the bad. There is a lot of bad, don't get me wrong, but AI is here. It's not going anywhere. We're going to have to figure out some way to live with it and govern it somehow. But I will have to save that for another time. One thing I would just say is I do kind of agree with this person. You need to look at everything askance today. Certainly if it's something that gets you worked up, definitely before you forward it or repost it. Because, just find the link to this article, go look at these videos. Because if you were just scrolling through your feed and saw this, you would absolutely want to believe that it was 100% real. And they were just not real. It's stunning. All right, a couple stories here that involve the current U.S. administration. I'm sorry if this sounds political, but to me it's not. I don't care who's doing this. This stuff is bad. First one's from the New York Times, and it's about a company called Palantir, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with that term, it's actually from The Lord of the Rings. And if you've seen the movies, it's that globe, that all-seeing eye that allows the wizards to spy on people. That's the name of this company. That should be giving you a clue about the kind of stuff this company does. And the current U.S. government is close to them through personal ties, which this article talks about. Let me just read the article. Again, from the New York Times. In March, President Trump signed an executive order calling for the federal government to share data across agencies, raising questions over whether he might compile a master list of personal information on Americans that could give him untold surveillance power. Mr. Trump has not publicly talked about the effort since, but behind the scenes, officials have quietly put technological building blocks into place to enable his plan. In particular, they have turned to one company, Palantir, the data analysis and technology firm. The Trump administration has expanded Palantir's work across the federal government in recent months. The company has received more than $113 million in federal government spending since Mr. Trump took office, according to public records, including additional funds from existing contracts as well as new contracts with the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon. And this does not include a $795 million contract with the Department of Defense awarded the company last week, which has not yet been spent. Representatives of Palantir are also speaking to at least two other agencies, the Social Security Administration and the Internal Revenue Service, about buying its technology, according to 6 government officials and Palantir employees with knowledge of the discussions. The push has put a key Palantir product called Foundry into at least 4 federal agencies, including the DHS and the Health and Human Services Department. Widely adopting Foundry, which organizes and analyzes data, paves the way for Mr. Trump to easily merge information from different agencies, the government official said. Creating detailed portraits of Americans based on government data is not just a pipe dream. The Trump administration has already sought access to hundreds of data points on citizens and others throughout governmental databases, including their bank account numbers, the amount of their student debt, their medical claims, and any disability status. Mr. Trump could potentially use such information to advance his political agenda by policing immigrants and punishing critics, Democratic lawmakers and critics have said. Privacy advocates, student unions, and labor rights organizations have filed lawsuits to block data access, questioning whether the government could weaponize people's personal information. Palantir's selection as a chief vendor for the project was driven by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, according to the government officials. At least 3 DOGE members formerly worked at Palantir, while 2 others had worked at companies funded by Peter Thiel, an investor and founder of Palantir. Some current and former Palantir employees have been unnerved by the work. The company risks becoming the face of Mr. Trump's political agenda, 4 employees said, and could be vulnerable if data on Americans is breached or hacked. Several tried to distance the company from the efforts, saying any decisions about merged database of personal information rest with Mr. Trump and not the firm. This month, 13 former employees signed a letter urging Palantir to stop its endeavors with Mr. Trump. Linda Zaya, a signee who was a Palantir engineer until last year, said the problem was not with the company's technology, but with how the Trump administration intended to use it. And this is a quote from Ms. Zaya, quote, "Data that is collected for one reason should not be repurposed for other uses. Combining all that data, even with the noblest of intentions, significantly increases the risk of misuse," unquote. Maria Trujillo, a lawyer for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights group, said the government typically collected data for good reasons, such as to accurately levy taxes. But, quote, "if people can't trust that the data they are giving to the government will be protected, that it will be used for things other than what they gave it for, it will lead to a crisis of trust," unquote. Palantir declined to comment on its work with the Trump administration and pointed to its blog, which details how the company handles data. And this is a quote from that blog, I guess. Quote, "We act as a data processor, not a data controller." And by the way, that's industry speak for things like GDPR and whatever. There's classifications for people that handle data, and that's what they're saying here. "Our software and services are used under direction from the organizations that license our products. These organizations define what can and cannot be done with their data. They control the Palantir accounts in which analysis is conducted," unquote. The White House did not comment on the use of Palantir's technology and referred to Mr. Trump's executive order, which said he wanted to, quote, "eliminate information silos and streamline data collection across all agencies to increase government efficiency and save hard-earned taxpayer dollars," unquote. Okay. So, yes, would it be more efficient? Maybe. I'm not sure that's true. Trying to merge all this data and keep it all up to date is not easy to do. And sometimes it's actually easier to keep this stuff segregated and segmented and purpose-driven. So I don't even buy the fact that putting this all in one database is somehow more efficient. It's probably not. But the real issue here is that all of these various government agencies have very private and personal information about each of us that they keep for their purposes and they need for what they do, like the IRS and whatever. They need your bank account information and things like that. But other departments don't need that information and should not have that information. And again, I don't care what party is in control. Whoever has this data, that's too much data. It's way, way too dangerous to consolidate all into one database. No one could be trusted with this much personal data. But even if the government never abuses it, it will be an irresistible target for malicious actors, including nation-state adversaries. Build it and they will come. One of the key things you do in security to keep things secure is you segment and compartmentalize. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. And given the current climate right now, I am definitely worried that this data will be abused. And it could be abused by anybody because there will eventually be a different president and a different administration, and they could use this exact same data for their own, nefarious purposes. It's not good, and we should be pushing back very hard on this. Okay, so if that wasn't bad enough, this administration is doing some other stuff that's really pissing me off. And that, again, I don't care what party's doing this. The fact that they're doing it is just wrong. This is an article from TechCrunch, and it's basically about them gutting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a fantastic agency doing really good work for us, the consumer. I don't get what the reasoning is here, but just FYI, this is what's going on. A senior Trump administration official has scrapped a plan that would have blocked data brokers from selling Americans' personal and financial information, including Social Security numbers. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, said in December of 2024 it planned to close a loophole under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the federal law that protects Americans' personal data collected by consumer reporting agencies such as credit bureaus and renter screening companies. The rule would have treated data brokers no differently than any other company covered under the federal law and would require them to comply with the law's privacy rules. The rule was withdrawn early Tuesday, according to its listing in the Federal Register. The CFPB's acting director, Russell Vought, who also serves as the director of the White House's Office of Management and Budget, wrote that the rule is, quote, not aligned with the Bureau's current interpretation, unquote, of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Data brokers are part of a multi-billion-dollar industry of companies that profit from collecting and selling access to vast amounts of Americans' personal and financial information. This personal data is then sold to other companies, as well as law enforcement and intelligence agencies, often without explicit permission of the individuals. Collecting huge banks of data also comes with inherent risks. Over the past year, at least 2 data brokers were hacked, spilling millions of Social Security numbers online and exfiltrating a huge trove of user location data that tracked millions of people's whereabouts. In 2024 alone, the Federal Trade Commission banned several data brokers from collecting and sharing data on individuals without their permission, following allegations of unlawfully tracking people. Privacy advocates have long called for the government to use the Fair Credit Reporting Act to rein in data brokers. The decision by the CFPB to cancel the rule comes days after the Financial Technology Association, an industry lobby group representing non-bank fintech companies, wrote to Vought in his capacity as the White House's budget director. The lobby group asked the administration to withdraw the CFPB's rule, claiming it would be harmful to financial institutions' effort to detect and prevent fraud. CFPB did not return a request for comment. I don't know what to add to that. This is just so maddening. I don't understand. This just seems like an absolute no-brainer to me. When we cannot pass a federal privacy law, at least we could force some of these data brokers to comply with some of the same limitations that are put on things like the credit bureaus. This was just a slam dunk and a no-brainer, and I don't know. I don't even know what to say anymore. But FYI, that happened. All right, next up, this is from The Record. And if you are a person who likes to use store loyalty cards, this is something you should listen to. A consumer watchdog said Tuesday that one of the country's largest grocery chains allegedly uses data collected from loyalty shoppers to build sometimes incorrect profiles of them and sell their information to other companies. Kroger, the largest traditional grocery chain in the U.S. by revenue, allegedly gathers detailed and far-reaching consumer data through their loyalty program to make educated guesses about their customers' incomes and willingness to buy expensive brands, according to a report published Tuesday by Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports says its probe reveals that Kroger's so-called income predictor also can, quote, differ markedly from reality, unquote. The investigation found that Kroger is also marketing the data it collects to more than 50 U.S. companies, which, if they buy it, are presumably using it for their own data profiling and targeting, Consumer Reports says. This finding is based on the experience of a Kroger customer in Oregon who used the state's relatively new data privacy law to force the grocery chain to reveal the data it had gathered about him and to whom it had been disseminated. He allegedly discovered that his Kroger-generated report was marketed to one of America's biggest data brokers, tobacco companies, financial entities, and a raft of analytics and marketing firms, Consumer Reports said. Again, quick aside, this is why transparency is key. We would not have known this had that law not given this person the right to find this out. Okay, Back to the article. Additionally, Kroger marketed the data to a healthcare tech company that collaborates with health insurers and a fintech payments platform involved in processing Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program subsidies, or SNAP, according to Consumer Reports. It's unclear which, if any, of the companies Kroger marketed the customer data to bought it. In a statement shared with the Recorded Future News, Kroger refuted the report's findings and said, quote, "The characterization of widespread pricing concerns is patently false. The Consumer Reports allegations boil down to misinformation reviewing a handful of discrete issues from billions of daily transactions. It in no way reflects the seriousness with which we take our transparent and affordable pricing," unquote. Harris Teeter and Ralph's stores also fall under the Kroger umbrella, which jointly serves about 63 million customers. Kroger has long been at the cutting edge of tracking shoppers with data and has aggressively promoted its loyalty program, leading to 95% of customer transactions being loyalty-based, Consumer Reports says. In October, it became public that Kroger planned to launch a facial recognition program at its stores. At the time, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib said that the plans, which appeared to be tied to its digital displays, could lead to biased pricing discrimination because of how the technology often inaccurately analyzes minority faces. The lawmaker worried that Kroger's rollout of the tech could lead it to individually profile customers, exactly what Consumer Reports says is now happening. A Kroger spokesperson said in a statement at the time that the company's mission is to build a, quote, "foundation of lowering prices to attract more customers," unquote. Prior to Tlaib's letter, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bob Casey in August said that they were worried that Kroger was creating personalized profiles on customers and then using them to, quote, "determine how much price hiking each of us can tolerate," unquote, by changing pricing displays on digital price tags. Consumer Reports says its findings show that Kroger is not only building customer profiles, but also making money off of them without consumers knowing. And this is a quote from Justin Brookman at Consumer Reports from a statement that they put out saying, quote, "Regardless of whether these consumer profiles are accurate or not, we need to rein in the rampant overcollection and misuse of consumer data and ensure that companies like Kroger are held accountable when they violate the trust of consumers and harm their pocketbooks," unquote. Brookman added that some state privacy laws are now making it possible for consumers and watchdogs to better understand data collection and dissemination programs like Kroger's alleged system. And then a final quote from Brookman, quote, "It's especially alarming to see Kroger distributing customers' personal information so broadly. We urge lawmakers at both the state and federal levels to enact strong privacy protections and to prohibit the practice of surveillance pricing," unquote. Okay, so just to be clear here, there's two things going on. First of all, I'm sure y'all must realize at this point that if you've got a loyalty card that you give out every time you check out, what that means is that your grocery store or your pharmacy or wherever you've got your loyalty card, that allows them to directly match everything you purchase with you personally and keep a record of that. And that data is worth something to somebody. And it's not just to the store where they're storing it, right? These people are packaging this up and selling it to other people. They're also doing analysis on this to try to figure out what your income level is and whether or not you might want to buy some other product that they don't sell, because that information might be valuable to somebody else who does sell that stuff. But what they're also talking about here with surveillance pricing is that, let's say every product on the shelf has a digital tag that can change at any time. So that, this is an efficiency thing, right? This saves endless hours of staff work going through and putting new tags on every single thing that comes through the door when the price changes or when there's a sale or whatever. You just send out a digital notice to all the tags in the store and say, "Hey, you tag over there, change your price to this right now." What they're actually speculating could happen with this kind of data is when somebody of means walks up to a product, they would show them one price. And when somebody who comes up who maybe doesn't have as much income walks up, they may show them a lower price. Or worse yet, if they know that you buy a lot of something and they think they want to get you to buy something else, they might jigger the prices to try to shift you from one product to another. Or they might try to attract you to buying a new product that they really want to sell because they've got a higher margin on that product or whatever. But the price could be different per person. And if it's a digital tag, it could theoretically change as you walk up to it if they're tracking you by your phone, let's say, or using facial recognition to recognize that that's you and where you are in the store. And the real kicker is these loyalty cards are really enticing. I mean, I admit it, I've got a grocery card. That's probably the only one I use, but it can save you a significant amount of money. I mean, in a lot of stores, the only way to get their sale prices is to have a loyalty card. And when you've got sale prices that are like buy one, get one for free, that's a 50% savings. So what can you do about that? Well, okay. So you could create multiple profiles. There's nothing stopping you from creating multiple accounts at these stores and just kind of shuffling it across. There's nothing preventing you from sharing it with other people, which kind of muddies the data. But here's a couple really interesting ones. And I think I tried this once and I can't remember if it worked. I want to say it didn't. But some people have gone to the trouble of registering well-known phone numbers with accounts and lets everybody share them. And one of the ones that is often quoted is 867-5309, which, as we all know from the 80s, is Jenny's phone number. So like pick your local area code. And, when they say, what's your loyalty number? A lot of times the number is tied to your phone number. So you'd say, well, it's 210-867-5309. And in some cases, you will find that somebody has actually registered that account. And so that's a big shared account. The other thing that I thought was interesting is, if you've ever noticed when you go through a store, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I've registered, but I left my card at home. That's usually what they ask you for your phone number, by the way, because that's the workaround for that. But if it's like, oh, it's with my, it's my wife's card, we share it, and I forget what number she put it on. Sometimes the clerk will say, well, here, we'll just use the store card. And sitting right there at the cashier's stand is the store card that they scan and gives you the same discount as if you would use your own card. But now it's not tracking you anymore. Well, some people have figured out that some of those store cards are registered against the phone number of the store itself. So if you look up that store's phone number, you can try giving that store's phone number as your number and see if it works. All right, let's move on. Next up, I've got two related articles from 404 Media, and it's about our favorite automated license plate reader company, Flock. So I'm just going to read these pretty much back to back, and then I'll give you my take. All right, first up, this one is titled, "A Texas Cop Searched License Plate Cameras Nationwide for a Woman Who Got an Abortion." Earlier this month, authorities in Texas performed a nationwide search of more than 83,000 automated license plate reader, or ALPR cameras, while looking for a woman who they said had a self-administered abortion, including cameras in states where adoption is legal, such as Washington and Illinois, according to multiple datasets obtained by 404 Media. The news shows in stark terms how police in one state are able to take the ALPR technology made by a company called Flock and usually marketed to individual communities to stop carjackings or find missing people, and turning it into a tool for finding people who have had abortions. In this case, the sheriff told 404 Media the family was worried for the woman's safety, and so authorities used Flock in an attempt to locate her. But health surveillance experts said that they still had issues with the nationwide search. And this is a quote from Kate Bertash of the Digital Defense Fund, who says, quote, "You have this extraterritorial reach into other states, and Flock has decided to create a technology that breaks through the barriers where police in one state can investigate what is a human right in another state because it is a crime in another," unquote. On May 9th, an officer from the Johnson County Sheriff's Office in Texas searched Flock cameras and gave the reason as, quote, "had an abortion, search for female," unquote, according to multiple sets of data. Whenever officers search Flock cameras, they are required to provide a reason for doing so, but generally do not require a warrant or any sort of court order. Flock cameras continually scan the plates, color, and model of any vehicle driving by, building a detailed database of vehicles and, by extension, people's movements. Cops are able to search cameras acquired in their own district, those in their state, or those in a nationwide network of Flock cameras. That single search for the woman spread across 6,809 different Flock networks, with a total of 83,345 cameras, according to the data. The officer looked for hits over a month-long period, it shows. Sheriff Adam King of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office told 404 Media in a phone call that the woman self-administered the abortion and, quote, "her family was worried that she was going to bleed to death and they were trying to find her to get her to a hospital. We weren't trying to block her from leaving the state or whatever to get an abortion. It was about her safety," unquote. Eva Galperin, director of cybersecurity at digital rights organization the Electronic Frontier Foundation, told 404 Media, quote, "The idea that the police are actively tracking the location of a woman they believe to have had self-administered abortions under the guise of safety does not make me feel any better about this kind of surveillance," unquote. The surveillance of women seeking abortions has long been a problem, and with the 2022 Dobbs Supreme Court decision allowing states to criminalize abortion, experts have warned that patients, the people who help them, and their doctors are at a much higher risk of surveillance and criminal prosecution. Earlier this week, 404 Media reported about the use of Flock cameras and its lookup tools to help the Department of Homeland Security and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Okay, moving on to the next article from 404 Media, which came out about a week later, about a different thing that Flock is now doing. Flock, the automated license plate reader company whose cameras are installed in more than 5,000 communities in the U.S., is building a product that will use people lookup tools, data brokers, and data breaches to, quote, jump from LPR, or license plate reader, to person, unquote, allowing police to much more easily identify and track the movements of specific people around the country without a warrant or court order, according to internal Flock presentation slides, Slack chats, and meeting audio obtained by 404 Media. The news turns Flock, already a controversial technology, into a much more invasive tool, potentially able to link a vehicle passing by a camera to its owner and then more people connected to them through marriage or other association. The new product development has also led to Flock employees questioning the ethics of using hacked data as part of their surveillance product, according to Slack chats. And I'll come back to that one in a minute because they had a follow-up article on that particular point. Flock told 404 Media the tool is already being used by some law enforcement agencies in an early access program. Flock's new product, called Nova, will supplement license plate data with a wealth of personal information sourced from other companies and the wider web, according to the material obtained by 404 Media. And this is a quote from a Flock employee during a company meeting that was recorded. And it says, quote, you're going to be able to access data and jump from LPR to person and understand what that context is, linked to other people that are related to that person through marriage or gang affiliation, etc. That's a very powerful linking, unquote. One Slack message says that Nova supports 20 different data sources that agencies can toggle on or off. Flock sells its ALPR cameras to communities, homeowners associations, schools, and businesses with the promises of solving crime and deterring criminals. Communities can then opt to share their cameras data with law enforcement, and law enforcement agencies purchase their own Flock cameras too. The cameras continuously record the plates, color, and make of vehicles passing in front of them, and store a timestamp of when and where each vehicle was spotted. Flock also expanded into drones and gunshot detection. Nova will make the product even more invasive, experts say. And this is a quote from Beryl Lipton, who was from the EFF. And Beryl says, quote, Flock has hundreds of customers, both law enforcement and private residents. This development will certainly help to bring expanded surveillance powers to police departments of all sizes that never needed this much information on any random person who happens to drive by, unquote. I chopped out a bit here where they started talking about where they're getting this information, but basically they're getting information from data brokers and other open source intelligence, public records and such. And so it sums up by saying, at the moment, a police officer might take a result from an ALPR database, a vehicle with this plate was at this location at this time, then use more data from other sources, such as the DMV, to find out who owns that vehicle. Then they might perform open source intelligence, or OSINT, to find out more about that person or where they live by digging through public records. And this is another quote from recorded at this Flock meeting. Someone said, quote, law enforcement uses these tools every day, just on a very fragmented basis. And what we're doing is bringing them under one roof, unquote. And then finally, another quote from Lipton from the EFF, who says, quote, for police, the definition of what is considered open source has really expanded to include information to which no one should ever have had access. Our health data, our financial records, or any of the other digital data is hacked and ends up on the internet. Companies scrape it up and add it to their package of information for police. Law enforcement would have otherwise needed to have a valid reason and a warrant to access such stuff, but now they can just buy that access, unquote. Okay, so this article implied that one of the sources that this new Nova tool might be using is actually data from the dark web, the hacked data. And apparently, there's a whole other article on this. If you want to look it up, just go to 404 Media and search on Flock. I'm sure you'll find this. But it was debated within the company. Like, that was something they actually considered doing. For example, there was a big license plate location data breach, Park Mobile or something like that contained a lot of people's information. And it was available on the dark web. And they were actually considering ingesting this information and including it as part of the things they were searching. And someone in the company got together and talked about the ethics of this, and they decided not to, for now, I feel compelled to say. So this article implied at the time that was unknown. It seems that later Flock, the company, responded and said, no, we're not going to do that. We thought about it, but we're not going to do that. So I talked with Adam Schwartz and Gowrie and AR from EFF about this. In January, we talked about automated license plate readers and how they are really proliferating and some of the problems with that. If you're interested more on that, you can go back and check out that episode. But this is just another part of the Panopticon that we all live in now. Our data is being siphoned up everywhere. Our faces, our license plates, our every movement through our phones, through our cars. And there's just no limits on what can be done. And that's because in the US, we just have no real privacy laws. And so companies like Flock are picking up the money that's just sitting right there on the table. And in the end, what that really means is that we have put the Fourth Amendment up for sale, which is something I will return to with some better news in just a minute. So let's keep moving. Okay, so now it's time for some good news. I actually have a few good news stories. Let's start with this one from Ars Technica, and it's about a new feature for Android phones, which iPhones had, I think, starting last year, which is just a great security measure. A silent update rolling out to virtually all Android devices will make your phone more secure, and all you have to do is not touch it for a few days. The new feature implements auto restart of a locked device, which will make your personal data harder to extract. It's coming as a part of a Google Play Services update, though, so there's nothing you can do to speed along the process. Google is preparing to release a new update to Play Services, version 25.14, which brings a raft of tweaks and improvements. First spotted by 9 to 5 Google, the update was officially released on April 14th, but as with all Play Services updates, it could take a week or more to reach all devices. When 25.14 arrives, Android devices will see a few minor improvements, including prettier setting screens, improved connection with cars and watches, and content previews when using QuickShare. More importantly, Play Services 25.14 adds a feature that Google describes thusly. Quote, with this feature, your device automatically restarts if locked for 3 consecutive days, unquote. This is similar to a feature known as inactivity reboot that Apple added to iPhone in iOS 18.1. This actually caused some annoyance among law enforcement officials who believed they had suspects' phones stored in a readable state, only to find that they were rebooting and becoming harder to access due to this feature. Like Apple's devices, Android phones are most secure when they've been freshly rebooted. In this before first unlock or BFU state, biometrics and location-based unlocking won't work. The only way to access the device is using the passcode or PIN. Additionally, all the data stored on the phone is encrypted in the BFU state, making retrieval and snooping much more difficult, even for law enforcement groups that have access to advanced data recovery tools. Rather than leave your phone, which is a vast repository of personal data, sitting unencrypted indefinitely, the new Play Services will limit that exposure to 3 days, even if it's plugged in. The early sluggishness of Android system updates prompted Google to begin moving parts of the OS to Google Play Services. This collection of background services and libraries can be updated by Google automatically in the background as long as your phone is certified for Google services, which almost all are. That's why the inactivity reboot will just show up on your phone in the coming weeks with no notification. There are definitely reasons to be wary of the control Google has over Android with elements like Play Services, but it does pay off when the company can enhance everyone's security without delay. All right, so we're actually going to talk about this before first unlock, this BFU state, in my tip of the week. So I'll revisit it there. But even though any phone today with a PIN code has its contents encrypted on the hard drive of the device, that data is accessible by the user of the device, right? I mean, if you log into the device, I need to be able to get to my data. So once you've booted the phone and unlocked it the first time, all of your apps now have access to your data, even though supposedly there's no way for anybody who can't unlock your phone to get that data. Turns out that because it's in sort of an unlocked, unencrypted state, at least for the official user of the phone, some police forensics tools like Celebrite and some of these other ones have found ways in some cases to get at some of your data, even if it's locked, as long as it's been unlocked at least once since it was rebooted. So by doing this, if your phone is idle and, turned off and locked, after 3 days of this, it will reboot itself, which gets it back to that fresher, more secure state of BFU, before first unlock. So that's great. I mean, it's a no-brainer feature. Why not do it? It makes your phone more secure. I think it's great. Because a lot of times what's happened if somebody steals your phone or confiscates your phone is they throw it in a Faraday bag, so it cannot be communicated with externally, because they want to keep it in that state so they could try to poke at it. But now, regardless, even if the phone can't talk to the network, after 3 days of being idle, it will reboot itself. I think that's kind of cool. All right, next up is a posting from Signal, the company that makes the encrypted app that's been all over the news. I'm actually just going to skip around and read this real quickly because it's probably just easier for me to summarize it. But let me just start a little bit and then I'll explain what's going on here. Signal Desktop, which in other words, that's the Signal app that runs on your computer, not the one that runs on your smartphone, now includes support for a new screen security setting that is designed to help prevent your own computer from capturing screenshots of your Signal chats on Windows. That's Microsoft Windows. This setting is automatically enabled by default in Signal Desktop on Windows 11. If you're wondering why we're only implementing this on Windows right now, it's because the purpose of the setting is to protect your Signal messages from Microsoft Recall. First announced on May 20th in 2024, Microsoft Recall takes screenshots of your apps every few seconds as you use your computer and then stores them in an easily searchable database. In Microsoft's own words, its goal is to act as a sort of photographic memory for everything you do on your computer. The words that other people chose to describe Recall upon its debut are decidedly less positive. After an intense security backlash and significant public outcry, Microsoft quickly pulled the feature. It's 1 year anniversary that nobody wants to celebrate, but Recall is back and Signal is ready. Although Microsoft made several adjustments over the past 12 months in response to critical feedback, the revamped version of Recall still places any content that's displayed within privacy-preserving apps like Signal at risk. As a result, we are enabling an extra layer of protection by default on Windows 11 in order to help maintain the security of Signal Desktop on that platform, even though it introduces some usability trade-offs. Microsoft has simply given us no other option. All right, so I'm just going to summarize the rest of this. Basically, if you've ever noticed if you try to take a screenshot of something on your screen that is protected content, like you're watching Netflix or you're watching your TV app or something on your show, and you try to take a screenshot of that, and you're thinking, oh, that's cool. I'm going to get a snapshot of this movie or a snapshot of what's being shown on the TV app that I'm watching, and you take a screenshot, and the screenshot is blank or black. That's because there's a thing built into those apps saying, hey, this is controlled content. We don't want anybody being able to take screenshots of this, so built into the operating system is a flag that says if they try to take a screenshot of this app, don't let them. Just give them a black screen or whatever. And so basically, because Microsoft isn't currently giving applications that are worried about privacy and security a way to opt out of this screen capture technology that takes a picture of your screen every few seconds and stores it in the database so that this AI program can help you remember what you were doing a few days ago, they're basically saying, look, people probably don't want that. And Microsoft is not giving apps yet any way to signal to the operating system, hey, we should not be included in that. We're a private app. There's a setting that the user said, hey, we don't want this captured as part of this Microsoft Recall feature, so don't capture it. So this is the next best thing they could come up with. They basically said, hey, we're showing DRM content, digital rights management content that's copyright protected or something. Don't include this in any screenshot. That's their solution to this problem because currently that's all Microsoft is giving them to work with. So again, that is Signal looking out for your privacy. And even though the messages on Signal are end-to-end encrypted, they are necessarily unencrypted at each end so that you can both write them and read them. So if you're viewing very private messages on your Signal app on Windows, but screenshots are being taken every 3 seconds, then all that conversation that's supposedly private is being captured and fed to some AI, and who knows if it's going to eventually be sent to Microsoft or whatever. So this is their response to that. So kudos again to Signal to looking out for your privacy. All right, next up, another one from the record, and this sounds really good, almost too good to be true. I hope I'm understanding this, but anyway, this has to do with an EU court ruling on privacy. And let me just read it real quick and then we'll talk. The Brussels Court of Appeal ruled Wednesday that the use of tracking by online advertisers relies on an inadequate consent model and is illegal in Europe. The ruling, which is not available in English, makes clear that an existing standard known as the Transparency and Consent Framework, and that's all in capitals, that is a term of art, is insufficient under Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, according to an Amnesty International summary of the decision. Companies have long relied on that framework as a means of continuing to target advertising under GDPR. Big tech companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and X, or Twitter, are most impacted by the decision because the court ruled that the pop-ups they typically use to ask for consent to track consumers and target advertising do not do enough to counter privacy violations inherent to the so-called real-time bidding process, Amnesty International said of the ruling. Real-time bidding is a system where advertisers can target ads to individuals as they are browsing the web and bid on individual ad impressions immediately based on the type of content consumers are reading. And actually, it's more than just that, but it's targeted advertising down to the millisecond as you're browsing the web. And this is a quote from Hannah Story from Amnesty. Hannah says, quote, "Every time you load a website, this personal information is shared with thousands of companies who then bid to show you an advert without proper control over your information, and that's a massive privacy breach. This is a major win for the right to privacy and a clear message that the tech industry should move away from surveillance-based advertising to a more rights-respecting model." Now this sounds really good, like almost too good. I don't know if there's in the US, if there's another appeals level this needs to go through yet, or if that's the final word. But this really sounds like it's going to shut down real-time bidding, or at least put in some newer, more explicit type of consent framework. I don't know. But so far, this is really good. And we've talked about real-time bidding in the past. I interviewed Dr. Johnny Ryan about this several years ago. That was a great interview. And I just recently talked to Zach Edwards about this as well. But Dr. Johnny Ryan calls real-time bidding basically the biggest data breach in history. Because it is. It's awful. So if you're not familiar with that, if you missed that recent episode, definitely go back and check that out. But this is really good news. Now, on the flip side, I've been reading a lot of headlines about reform coming to GDPR in the EU, which doesn't sound good. Ostensibly, it's about protecting small and medium businesses from overly burdensome regulations. But a lot of times that's really just code for we want to gut this law, and lobbyists who are supposedly representing these businesses are actually representing the advertisers. So we'll keep an eye on that and see where that goes. All right, one more good one, and then we'll get to the tip of the week. And this is from the EFF, actually, a post from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And it's about Montana's new privacy law. Montana has done something that many states in the United States Congress have debated but failed to do. It has just enacted the first attempt to close the dreaded, invasive, unconstitutional, but easily fixed data broker loophole. This is a very good step in the right direction because right now, across the country, law enforcement routinely purchases information on individuals it would otherwise need a warrant to obtain. What does that mean? In every state other than Montana, if police want to know where you have been, rather than presenting evidence and sending a warrant signed by a judge to a company like Verizon or Google to get your geolocation data for a particular set of time, they only need to buy that same data from data brokers. In other words, all the location data apps on your phone collect, sometimes recording your exact location every few minutes, is just sitting for sale on the open market, and police routinely take that as an opportunity to skirt your Fourth Amendment rights. Now, with SB 282, Montana has become the first state to close the data broker loophole. This means the government may not use money to get access to information about electronic communications, presumably metadata, the contents of electronic communications, contents of communications sent by a tracking device, digital information on electronic funds transfers, pseudonymous information, or quote-unquote sensitive data, which is defined in Montana as information about a person's private life, personal associations, religious affiliation, health status, citizen status, biometric data, and precise geolocation. This information is now fully off limits to police. There are other ways for law enforcement in Montana to gain access to sensitive information. They can get a warrant signed by a judge. They can get consent of the owner to search a digital device. They can get an investigative subpoena, which unfortunately requires far less justification than an actual warrant. Despite the state's insistence on honoring lower threshold subpoena usage, SB 282 is not the first time Montana has been ahead of the curve when it comes to passing privacy-protecting legislation. For the better part of a decade, the Big Sky state has seriously limited the use of face recognition, passed consumer privacy protections, added an amendment to their constitution recognizing digital data as something protected from unwarranted searches and seizures, and passed a landmark law protecting against the disclosure or collection of genetic information and DNA. SB 282 is similar in approach to H.R. 4639, a federal bill the EFF has endorsed, introduced by Senator Ron Wyden, called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. H.R. 4639 passed through the House in April 2024, but has not been taken up by the Senate. Absent the United States Congress being able to pass important privacy protections into law, states, cities, and towns have taken it upon themselves to pass legislation their residents sorely need in order to protect their civil liberties. Montana, with a population of just over 1 million people, is showing other states how it's done. EFF applauds Montana for being the first state to close the data broker loophole and show the country that the Fourth Amendment is not for sale. So, yay, Montana. way to go, guys. That is fantastic. And now we just need the other 49 states to do the same thing, or the federal government to get off its butt and do something similar. Okay, now it is time for the tip of the week. And as you can tell, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. It's getting a little bit hoarse, so I apologize for that. But I'm basically updating you with some real life experience on my recent trip to Alaska and what happened when I came back through Customs and Border Protection. And I learned some things, and things I probably should have figured out before I went. But nevertheless, I am going to let you know what happened to me, which I think informs an article and I did in a previous tip of the week I did about how to prepare for going across the border. I knew I was taking this trip. In fact, I know I've got another international trip later this summer, and I knew I was going to be coming back through U.S. Customs. And I've traveled a lot internationally. I've been to dozens of countries, literally. But it's been a while since I've done this. And honestly, things have gotten real sketchy in the U.S. lately. And there's been a lot more crackdowns and a lot more privacy invasions and a lot more nosiness, honestly, of law enforcement agents, including people at the border, even for U.S. citizens. And so I had heard anecdotally some stories that bothered me. And so I decided to look into this and figure out what I was going to do. And so I gave you a whole bunch of recommendations that I had put together from this research. And I just put this into practice because I did an Alaska cruise, started in Anchorage, came back through Vancouver, meaning I was doing an international trip and I had to come back through U.S. Customs to get home. So in my head, I had this all figured out. I knew what I was going to do. I decided that, gosh darn it, I need to be able to take my real phone with me. I wasn't going to take a burner phone, even though I have one. I was going to take my real phone with me, my iPhone. My iPhone is pretty darn secure, and I know how to make it more secure. I can put it in lockdown mode. I can restart it, get it into that BFU state, that before first unlock state. And similarly, I took an iPad with me because they're basically iPhones. They have the same security model and the same kind of security tools. So I took those, and I left my laptop at home, which was very sad because I use my laptop for everything. But I figured, okay, this is my compromise. I took an iPad with a keyboard case, which was sort of like a laptop, but honestly not really. And I was going to bring those back, and I decided I was going to get them in the super secure mode when I went through the border and I went through customs and security. And, if they asked me to turn them on, I would turn them on. If they asked me to unlock them, I was going to say no. I had made up my mind that I had nowhere to be. If they detain me, if they make me miss my flight, even if they took my devices, you know what? I was going to do that. I was willing to do that. I was ready to do that. So we get off the boat, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got a flight from Vancouver to a Midwestern city in the U.S., and then from there, another flight to my home. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go through customs when I hit U.S. soil, right? So I don't have to worry about that yet. I'll worry about it when I get to that first stop. When I get off the plane, I'll be on U.S. soil. That's when I'll go through customs. So I'm getting off the boat, and I'm going through one of the lines to get on to the airport. I'm like, this is not normal. Like, this is not just going to the airport. I'm like, oh, crap. I'm going to go through customs in Canada. And I should have known better than this. I've traveled internationally. This happens sometimes. There are arrangements made between countries so that sometimes you actually go through the customs process on foreign soil. Like, it's almost like an embassy, right? There's this kind of area, this terminal is kind of set up as pseudo U.S. land, and you go through U.S. customs there, and there's U.S. customs agents in the foreign country to get you at your first stop, not your second stop. So as I figure this out while I'm in line, I'm like, okay, crap. I was planning to have a whole flight to think about this and get ready. So I'm frantically turning off my phone. So I literally get my phone turned off right before I get to the first security person who says, show me your boarding pass. Well, guess where the boarding pass was? It was on my phone. Now, I put my phone in lockdown mode because otherwise I'm pretty sure I could get to the QR code, the digital boarding pass, from my phone without having to unlock it first. But I couldn't. And the only reason I could think of was because I had put it in lockdown mode. That was no longer available. So there I am at the security person, and I just had to undo everything I just did in order to show them my boarding pass, which I did. I unlocked it, showed the boarding pass, got through there, and I had to hold up the line a little bit because I had to wait for my phone to turn back on and get it unlocked. And I had to unlock it right there to show the QR code. I was not happy. So I get through that line and I turned it back off again. And then thinking that was the only time I was going to do it, which is dumb, I had to show my boarding pass at least 2 more times through this line to different people. So it was basically out the window. This whole plan I'd had about keeping my phone locked and not unlocking it was totally out the window. I couldn't I couldn't really just keep turning the phone off. It was just too painful. So there was a lesson to be learned there. And I'll come back to all the lessons at the end of this, my key takeaways. But here's the other thing that I found that it was really disturbing. This trip I took started with a train trip up at Denali. I went to the Denali Park and took a fantastic train trip from Denali down to the coast where I got on the ship. On the train, which was operated by the cruise operator, right before we pulled into the port town, somebody comes around with an iPad and takes everybody's picture. You got to show him your ID, and he takes a picture of your face. And he was telling people as he was doing this is used for facial recognition on the cruise ship. And I can tell you that where I saw this was whenever you went to port and got on and off the ship, you not only would give them your room card where they'd scan it, but that would immediately bring up on their system the picture that they took on the train, and they would look at you and say, yes, that is you. And they would also do it on the way back in. Now, there were probably cameras throughout the ship that were using facial recognition, but I didn't see them. I didn't look too hard because there wasn't much I could do about them if they were there. And I'm sure some of that's for security, and they want to make sure that everybody made it back on board and things like that. I get why they did it, but there was no choice. Like when the guy came around, it was like, we'd like to take your picture. Would you like to participate in this? That was not on there. It was like, smile, I'm taking your picture. And furthermore, as I was going through customs, and I must have done a face scan at least twice, going through the gauntlet of customs and border security stuff, as I went from the transfer bus off the ship into my terminal at the airport. Now that I cared a little bit less about because years ago I signed up for the global entry program, so they already have my face. But it still just irks me because even as I was going through that, there was no choice. As I walked up to the counter for the customs and showed them my passport, there was a camera right there, and it's like, look into the camera. There was no choice. There was no like, would you mind looking into the camera? That was what you do. So I just found that terribly disturbing. So anyway, after all of this worrying and prep and writing articles and telling you guys about this, at the end of the day, nothing happened. Nobody ever asked to see my phones, let alone unlock them or hand them over. When I got to the final guy, who probably would have been the guy who's going to say something, he looked at my passport, he looked at my face and said, have a good day. Now, that said, I am a US-born white male who is in the global entry program. I was going through the privileged line anyway, and these guys knew all about me. So, your mileage may certainly vary depending on any of those factors. So in my particular case, it was all for nothing. Now, there was one random case in there, literally random, where at one of the points through this process, you press this big red button, and then a light lights up, and that light is either green or red. And this is some random thing going on. At least I hope it's random. It's supposed to be random. It's a random selection for further inspection. So if that light had turned red when I punched that button, they would have looked through my stuff more. And I'm not sure what would have happened in that case, but supposedly that's totally random. So even if you've got global entry, there's always that, right? I mean, I don't know how often that thing goes off. I don't know what percentage of people they pull off for extra inspection, but that could have tripped me up. And in this case, it just didn't. So what are my takeaways? What do I want to pass on to you about this? Well, first of all, the way you really needed to do this, which I did not think about, was I should have had a paper boarding pass. It was okay to have the QR code on my phone. I could still have that there. But when I was going through this process, I really should have printed off a paper boarding pass, or even just printed my QR code itself onto a piece of paper. That probably would have been sufficient. And then I could have left my phone in my backpack and never turned it on, let alone brought it out. Second, I really should have gone through the motions of this ahead of time. I was really being overconfident. I thought I'd thought about this so much that I knew exactly what I was going to do. And there were some surprises that hit me that I was not prepared for. I really should have gone through this and thought about contingency plans. I was really only thinking about one possible way through this, and it turns out there were ways I should have thought more about. So the next thing is these cameras and facial recognition are they are everywhere. So I don't know how to practically avoid it now, because it's really, they say that you have the option, but when I go through airports now, there's never a line where it's like, here's the line for the people who don't want to get their face scanned. All the lines, all the people that you go to get your ID checked on, they scan your ID, they scan your face. And while on paper, I could probably say, hey, I don't want to do this, it would have been like, okay, sir, why don't you go on that special line in that special office over there that will take you a lot longer to do. And I'm going to make fun of you while you do it in front of all these people, and you're going to look weird. Go right ahead. No one's going to do that, and they shouldn't have to do that. But that is where we are today. And the other point to make about that is, even if you decide that at the point of these check-ins and security check-ins where they've got a dedicated camera facing you, even if you find a way around that, there are cameras all over the place in these airports, including, up in the ceiling and other places. You have already been photographed. You've probably already been identified by your face. Furthermore, since those cameras are everywhere, if they really wanted to get into my devices, somebody probably could have dialed up footage of me opening my phone by typing in the PIN code, right? So, I would have had to put something over my phone to unlock it so that the cameras wouldn't do it. And of course, if somebody saw me doing that on a camera, that would probably flag me as someone doing something suspicious. The whole system is all about surveillance, and there's honestly, practically speaking, very little we can do about it, except lobby our legislators to give us privacy laws and try to protect our data and give us more options, true, valid, workable options if we don't want this kind of surveillance. I will say one more thing. If you get, I meant to say this earlier and I forgot. If you get a paper printed boarding pass from the airline, there are some secret markings on there. Well, not secret, just obfuscated markings on there that you could look for that might designate you as somebody who's going to be given a secondary screening. And one of them is SSSS. If you see that on your boarding pass, that probably means secondary security screening selection. Apparently that's a thing that's done. There's a link to a Wikipedia article on that if you want to read more. I guess Southwest Airlines has a slightly different indication. It's some sort of a checkerboard thing. But anyway, that is another potential advantage to getting a printed boarding pass. You might know if it's coming. And one other anecdote that I'll share that may or may not be true. This could be apocryphal. Actually, I heard from somebody, and I checked on this, and I verified other places, that if you participate in the global entry, and I think it's global entry specifically, not necessarily TSA PreCheck, but maybe both. But certainly with the global entry, which is the international version of TSA PreCheck in the US. If you sign up for that program, it's not easy, by the way. You actually have to go physically into an office somewhere. A lot of these offices actually exist in airports. So if you got a long layover, sometimes you can get this done while you're at a layover. Anyway, it's a process. Once you get in there and you've given them all this information, including pictures of you and whatnot, if for some reason you are identified as somebody that will go on a watch list of some sort, if you're somebody they don't want traveling or for some reason you qualify for special attention, I've been told that your global entry status will be revoked, and they have to let you know when it is revoked. So it's sort of a canary in the coal mine for getting on the quote unquote list. Now, I don't know all the implications of that are specifically. Take that with a large grain of salt. Take all of this with a large grain of salt. This is just what happened to me, and these are my opinions. But I wanted to share that with you since we just talked about this and pass along a real world example, a single anecdote of what I found when I went through this. So there you have it. There's your news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for today. My voice is giving out anyway, but a couple last things before we go. First of all, I did mention the really long but very interesting article from The Atlantic about Michael Bazzell and what it takes to disappear. In fact, it's called How to Disappear. It's paywalled. I had an archive.ph link to it, but it's really flaky. I'm not sure what's blocking me at home. I can get to it on my phone, but I can't get to it from my desktop. I thought it might be NextDNS blocking it, but that doesn't seem to be it. I'm not sure what's going on there. But I'll give you the link to the Atlantic one, but you might try some of the archiving services to see if you can get around the paywall, because that's a really interesting article. Also, Yael Grauer, who we recently interviewed, who is the owner of Bad Bool, or the Big Ass Data Broker Opt-Out List, which is a fantastic resource, has also updated their opt-out spreadsheet. This is a list of maybe a dozen or so data opt-out companies that try to remove your information off the internet, like Easy Opt-Outs and Incogni and some of these others. And it breaks down the 3 top tiers of sites where you need to try to delete your data. And it painstakingly goes through and shows which of those services actually tackle which of those sites. It's really amazing. The amount of effort that gone into that is just amazing. So anyway, it's a public Google sheet. If you want to use it for your own checklist, you should make a copy, which it says right on the sheet. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And I also updated my article on this, which was phase 3 of my OSINT series of articles on firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. I put a link to the spreadsheet there as well. It's a fantastic resource. My top patrons this week will get their regular every other week installment of Merlin's Musings. And I think this week I'm going to talk about an idea I had several years ago. I actually pitched it to my company as a patent idea, and they passed. That is kind of coming around. I've seen implementations that are similar, but it's still an idea that I think I would like to explore. So anyway, Merlin's Musings, I will muse on that topic, I think, this week for my patrons. And that will come out Thursday morning as usual. We've got a lot of great interviews coming up. I still have several that I've recorded that I haven't released yet. We'll finally get to my interview with Debbie Reynolds next week. The Data Diva, I was on her show a while back, which is a good one to go listen to and maybe share with others. But I also had her on my show. We interviewed some time back, and I'm really glad to finally be getting that one out. And after that, we'll hear from Bruce and Heidi Potter, who were the founders of ShmooCon, who had its 20th and final instance of their conference last January, which was just fabulous. I'm so glad I had a chance to go to that. And there's some really interesting stories from those guys. Then I'll be talking with Andy Liddell from the EdTech Law Center. We're going to be talking about some lawsuits against some education technology companies that are violating the privacy of their kids, or that is the allegation. I've also got my interview with Deviant coming up. He is basically a world-renowned lockpicker and safecracker and a security guy and a hacker. And that was another very interesting story. And I got several more great ones in the works, including Cory Doctorow and others. So if you have not already, subscribe, and then you will be sure to get all of that amazing content. That'll do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know it was a long episode today. So until next week, as always, stay safe out there. And don't get caught with your drawbridge down.